Padmaja. Go ahead, Padmaja.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this AbleNet University session, this webinar on engaging and interactive literacy journey for learners with severe and multiple disabilities. Again, welcome everyone. We are going to go ahead and begin with a poll. Please let us know what your role is in the education field. Are you an administrator, an AT specialist, occupational therapist, or paraprofessional? Please let us know. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and share the results. We do have AT specialists and occupational therapists and physical therapists, and a few parents as well. That's wonderful. And a lot of special education teachers. And this would be definitely applicable to a wide spectrum of people. So thank you for joining today's session. So what is the focus of today's session? You would have read in the description about this webinar that the focus is on language arts activities and reading activities that is kind of adapted to the students who have cognitive, communication, motor, and behavioral needs and challenges. So at the end of this session, you should be able to walk away with some new ideas, or at least validate many of the good things that you are already doing, and how to expand language and vocabulary skills. And all the time thinking about how can you link that literacy with personal, functional, relevant activities for that specific student. How do you enable the students through these language and reading activities to build their concept knowledge, their cognitive skills, and link it to, let's say, the story concepts, fiction and nonfiction, but especially fiction, which I would focus on today, the theme and the characters, the various events that takes place, and all that. How to use multi-sensory hands-on approach. And I'm going to also depict a couple of student scenarios so that you can see some connection between your own students and the students I depict, as well as various theme-based kind of stories that you can connect with whatever curriculum that you're using. And underlying all of these things is the application of universal design for learning principles. That should be at the back of our mind as we are delivering instruction and monitoring the progress of students, because we have to make sure the student that you are presenting, you are teaching, you are guiding, you are modeling should be accessing that information that you're presenting. And the student is actively participating, learning in that process, because your focus has to be on what the student is learning. Is he or she being, being able to respond? Is he or she learning from what is being taught? That's important. And for that, the guiding principle is the universal design for learning. Action and expression from the student in response to the information that you have presented. So with that beginning, I want to introduce myself to those of you who are not familiar with me. I am an author of a number of books. All the things that you see, several of them are books, 9 of them. And then 4 of them are mini guides, like this one on mindfulness and behavior guide, and the STEM for early childhood. And this one is an autism guide. And one of the things that I have done, and I have gained a lot of knowledge from, is through my on-site visits to classrooms that serve students with significant disabilities, severe and multiple disabilities, and students with a variety of complex and diverse needs, including students with autism. And the webinar today, I am drawing information from 2 of my books. They are adapted and from those books, and those books are, one of them is The Students with Significant Disabilities at the Crossroads of IDEA and ESSA. How do we make sure we follow the law, but at the same time, how do we make sure the students are gaining access to the curriculum and are able to demonstrate what they have learned? And the other book, Serving Students with Severe and Multiple Disabilities, in a couple of months, a new edition of the book will come. But this particular edition also, this is the 2nd edition, also gives a lot of very practical hands-on resources. I would like to begin thinking about whether we are teaching language or science or math, think in terms of a UDL, Universal Design for Learning guided lesson framework. I know all of you are following the curriculum content standards that your district requires and the state requires. But for a student with severe and multiple disabilities, you may have a curriculum that is linked to the state standards, but focuses on the critical functional elements of the student, elements of the curriculum. And then with adaptations that you, and supports that you use for that student and or a group of students. And then your IEP objectives are drawn from there, and you are making sure you have a kind of a progress monitoring checklist. And then most importantly, as we are creating this framework, it is important to have a good idea of the individual student's profile. What are her cognitive needs or communication needs, behavior needs, so that you can tailor the delivery of instruction based on the student's strengths, preferences, and needs. And then you have to think in terms of how are you going to actually deliver that instruction? What is the description of the activity? What are some multiple ways you're going to try to reach that student? And how are you going to implement that lesson? What are the materials you are going to have? Because there is a critical need for high quality instruction that's very creatively choreographed, so that your instructional delivery is creatively choreographed. And it should incorporate personalized adaptations and supports that is specific to that particular student. The reason I want to emphasize this is there is, unfortunately, a perception that students with severe and multiple disabilities have substantial personal care needs, and we think often that they may have few innate strengths. And because of that, we think they may have significant difficulties in learning and demonstrating any new kind of skills. So this is something we should move away from, that thinking that they, because of their significant personal care needs, that needs to be attended to, and that they cannot really demonstrate new skills. So when you are designing this framework based on the curriculum that you are using, you have to make sure that you have adapted materials to use with that curriculum. Make sure you are using creative teaching techniques and adapted tools, positive behavior approaches that will build on the students' attention and focus and concentration skills. And then, of course, the necessary technology support matched to the specific needs of the student. Because all these supports that you are using should help reduce the impact of the learner's significant needs that may be imposed by cognitive needs, motor needs, behavior needs, and communication needs, attention and focus, executive function needs. So when you are planning, it is important that you think of all these things when you are delivering instruction. And at the same time, one of the important things is that instruction is systematic instruction. You are breaking down the tasks into as minute parts as will meet the need of that student. And at the same time, you're using a hierarchy of prompting procedures. And you are not making that prompting too intrusive unless there is an absolute need for it, and gradually reduce that intensive prompting. And that you are using wait time and time delay for the student to respond. And then you provide immediate corrective feedback so that you don't keep accepting incorrect responses and then continuously prompt with correct responses. You should immediately stop that incorrect response and then provide the corrective feedback. And then if it doesn't work, it is important to do a task analysis to break down the task. This will eventually lead to the student gaining new skills, so that instead of repeating the skills over and over and over again, or just moving them from one lesson to the next, we have to make sure they have gained the objectives, the learning objectives that they are supposed to gain from that particular lesson, and repeated instruction to make sure that they are gaining those skills. So I'm going to go ahead to help us all understand this better with a learner profile. What are the student's strengths, preferences, and needs? Joe, just imagine a student. I'm just giving a name. He is very friendly, and he tries to initiate communication with peers and adults. How does he express himself, or his wants and needs, or how does he communicate? Mostly with body movements, facial expression, touching objects, and through making vocalizations. He is functioning at the pre-symbolic level. He's just beginning to identify a few picture symbols. He uses a wheelchair for mobility, and he is currently receiving the use of a few simple assistive technology devices. So some of the things that you can see on this slide, he may need a choice board. Initially, very simple with a correct response and an incorrect response if you're presenting story. He may need definitely an adapted summary. I'm going to show you an example of an adapted summary. And this is kind of one page, let's say, and the student has the opportunity to touch. When you say touch the apple, he touches the picture, or preferably if there is an apple that you can show, he can connect the real apple with the picture of the apple too. And then you are also going to use some response tools like I like, or I don't like, or yes or no responses paired with technology. In addition to some of these characteristics or strengths and preferences, Joe has difficulty paying attention, and he can stay on the whatever you are presenting, maybe for 5 to 7 minutes. He has limited vocabulary and he requires redirection. But most importantly, some of these needs can be addressed if his motivation level rises by the way you present the information, by making it interactive, and through choice-making opportunities and reducing the text. So what are some of the things that you would use? Stories and text passages that are very limited text, simplifying the story. And I'm going to show you an example of a simplified story. Like, for example, this one is the story of the giving tree, and each page has just one sentence, and there is a large picture, or you can attach some objects as well. So this is one example of a simplified adapted text in order to sustain the students' attention. I'm going to show you another example. And this is the Charlotte's Web. And in this one, again, we have pictures and just one or two, just one picture, maybe one or two sentences that explain the picture, but it is connected to the story. It's a simplified, adapted summary of the story. So these are things that will help connect the student with the story, but at the same time, the student, you should stop at various points and allow the student the opportunity to demonstrate what he or she has understood from that particular part of the text. And whenever you can, you want to use storyboards. What are storyboards? It is the different elements of the story. When you use those kind of storyboards, and it could be put on an eye gaze board, or it could be put on a Dyson mat for someone like Joe, or it can be just placed on the on a page of a book. So make sure you support with visual aids, with graphic organizers. And then one of the things we often don't do too much of is to create a kind of a role play and drama. And that adds to the motivation and the interest. And then also use video clips, multimedia presentation, multiple ways to emphasize the key elements of the story. Let's say you are teaching historical events, a timeline, not 20 different events that took place, but maybe select a few, maybe in the beginning with 2, the beginning and the end, then it's expanded to 4 events, or maybe 6 events. And then if you can find some objects to attach with it, concrete representational item, do that. And then if you can pair it with something like a technology tool, do that, so that the student can practice it and match it, especially the picture and the text and the audio combined together will help the student to grasp the information much better. So when you're thinking in terms of the learning objectives for someone like Joe, what is he learning? What is your goal, ultimate goal for him? The critical elements, the key events in the story, or it may be a song or a poem that you use, or not, what are the critical elements? And then if it is a story, who are the characters in the story? How do you build on the student's vocabulary? How do you help the student's comprehension? And at the same time, oral communication as well as the written communication. Even if Joe is not currently using words, it is possible that he could use some written text that has pictures paired with text that he selects from to complete a writing framework. And then let him, as much as possible, connect with a speech generating device wherever, let's say he is going into the cafeteria. Instead of someone else talking for him, if he could use that speech generating device to make a selection, that would help. And throughout the day, if there are ways to improve the students' attention to various tasks, we have to find ways. And for that, it has to be highly motivating and connect with the students' comprehension level. Okay, we have a poll. Which do you routinely use to break down the barriers for your students so that you can increase participation, but at the same time also draw out what the student has learned from that lesson? So which of the following options do you use? Do you provide adapted simplified summary? Or do you use concept maps, graphic organizers paired with concrete items or photos? Do you adjust and match the complexity level of the questions that you pose to your student depending on the functioning level of the student? Or do you offer multiple ways, or do you do several of them? Offer multiple ways for students to respond within the same lesson. One may respond with making a choice between two things, correct and incorrect, whereas someone else may have several choices to select from, who is at a slightly higher functioning level. Okay, I think most of you have responded. Several of you do use adapted summary. I think some of the curriculum does come with adapted summary. And concept maps, maybe that's one area maybe you can try, because in addition to the simplified summary, if you can in combination use a concept map that connects them with the story elements, or even if it is a nonfiction, the major features, it would help with the comprehension and the student knowledge. And it's good that many of you are using multiple ways for the student to respond. Okay, those are the results, and thank you. Thank you for doing that poll. And looks like many of you do use a variety of ways to reach students, but if you can combine that concept map with a simplified summary, it will lead to better understanding and comprehension. And when we are asking questions, it's important to match the questions and not ask the same question to every student. The reason being, you may have a student who is somewhat higher functioning than, let's say, Joe, okay? And you want to phrase a little bit more open-ended type of question, whereas Joe may be responding with a yes or no, or making a choice between two given choices. So when you're delivering instruction, it is important to draw attention to the pictures and the object symbols representing the story. Let us say you're using something of this concept map. Then you have to stop in the middle and say, can you touch the tree? Can you touch the boy? So that they are making connection between what you are sharing with what is part of the story. That will also maintain their attention. One of the other ways is you can use a flashlight, and if you have an eye gaze board or if you are using a mini whiteboard like this, you can use a flashlight and flashlight on the particular picture or the object, the concrete item that you have, to bring the student attention to focus on that. And this you may use with the key vocabulary words, and enable the student to manipulate that picture or manipulate that object, so that they have that touch, and the seeing it, touching it, and then connecting it with a speech device would further cement that concept in the student's mind. And then a writing adaptation for someone like Joe would be a very simple beginning letter. I'm still thinking in terms of the giving tree. I am assuming most of you are familiar with that. But anyway, in that story, the boy goes and asks different things at different stages in his life from the tree. And in the beginning, when he's a little boy, he's asking for, as he grows into, in the beginning, it is just mainly the tree is giving apples and he's asking for money. And so what is the boy asking for? The student has to just make a choice in the beginning to demonstrate the student's comprehension, whether it is apple or is it money. What is the boy asking for? What does the tree give? And could the student respond maybe with a yes or no, or with an assistive technology device? So these are all the different types of adaptation you can think of to make sure the student is gaining from what you have spent time teaching. And then as you work with the student, and the student moves beyond the two choices, the correct choice and the incorrect, you can add a distractor as a choice. And this should be part of your delivery of instruction. Frequently we read, and we maybe have different students read, or if you have a student like Joe who does not read, we usually pass that student by, or if the story is programmed into a device, unfortunately, what I have seen is a paraeducator activates the device on behalf of the student. Let us see if the student can name a sentence, is able to activate the device that is part of a sentence from the story. So that we have to give every student an opportunity to interact during the lesson delivery. So, and through providing cues and prompts, you can enable that. You can get the student to focus attention. Otherwise, the student may be looking somewhere else, and the rest of the students who are maybe higher functioning than Joe will be interacting, or may be reading, or will participating. But while Joe may be just looking at the wall, looking at the floor, or playing something in his hand. How do we make sure to draw him into the lesson? And through combining pictures, objects, gestures, facial expression, we can draw him in. And this is at the foundation of the universal design for learning principles. And the student has opportunities to look at, touch, point to, and maintain attention with objects and pictures that are illuminated, and then demonstrate comprehension of the story. So still staying with the giving tree story, one of the things that you can do is to create a PowerPoint presentation. In other words, there is a lot of repetition, and in different formats, you present that story. And this is where paraeducators can play a critical role in helping prepare some of these materials, and also in the follow-up practice session when she may be working with 2 or 3 students who are functioning very similar to Joe and going over some of these lessons. Instead of focusing on 20 vocabulary words that come in that particular story, or vocabulary words that you are teaching anyway, limit it to 3 or 4 in the beginning. Let the student master it. and then add 2 or 3 more, and then 3 more. And then when they're completely mastered, start a new set. So when we do that, instead of teaching 20 at the same time, we can ensure at the end of 6 months or at the end of 9 months, the student has increased and expanded her vocabulary. That should be our goal constantly. Instead of doing things for the student, let's enable the student to be able to demonstrate. And then one of the things is a dramatic presentation. You may ask, how does the student who is not able to communicate using words take part in a dramatic presentation? The student may hold a sign. In addition to that, the student may hold a tool that is associated with that character. In addition to that, if the student may activate a device, that's the script for his role in that story. When we do these kind of variety of ways, we are increasing students' executive function as well. Someone like Joe needs that kind of attention and focus build up. And then it is important to teach using a kind of a very simplified graphic concept mask. What is the story about? Given choices about the theme, the student makes a selection and then express her or his opinion about what the story is about and the different characters in the story, or what happened, one of the events in the story, or multiple events. Depending on that, one student may identify one of the events in the story. Another student who is at a slightly higher functioning level may be able to identify 4 events from the story. And one of the things that I would like to suggest is, when you create a word wall, vocabulary wall, most classrooms do have a kind of a word wall, at least at the elementary level. It is important to have limited number of words, and more periodically. When I say periodically, maybe every 2 weeks or 3 weeks, you are changing that word wall, leaving maybe a couple of words that the students have become familiar with and adding maybe 4 or 5 new ones. And then pair the text with a picture as much as possible. And the other thing you can do is you can actually put a device, a SGD device, an AT device not next to it that's programmed with that particular word. So that, think of this scenario. Your students leave the classroom several times a day. Maybe they are going to the cafeteria, or maybe they are going to recess. At that time, as they are lining up, that would be a great opportunity to go over the words, especially if it is on a wall as they are leaving the classroom. So that's several, and at the end of the day, at the beginning of the day, 3 or 4 times you can practice those words. So within 2 weeks, those words become very familiar to the students. And these are all some of the additional tools that you can use. And this one, for example, on this side is the an adapted book, 2 pages from the book. And there are several pages, and you simplified it by having 1 sentence and a large image that depicts, that explains, that expands on that particular sentence, so that the student can connect with the concept, that's the language and the concept that's presented, and the vocabulary that is presented on those pages. So I have already mentioned how you reduce the total amount of text presented at a given time, and how do you facilitate that student's response during the delivery, and then give opportunities for the student to manipulate the objects and the tactile symbols, and then getting the student to either gesture towards the item, or they may use eye gaze, and especially if you're using an eye gaze board, that would be one way. So different students within that same group of students that you teach may respond in different ways, and we have to facilitate that. And then one of the things that they may do is, if the text, the adapted text, is programmed into a speech generating device, the student has the opportunity to repeat that sentence, even if she is not using words, but by activating the device. And one of the things that we need to use much more of, and which is an evidence-based practice, is peer tutoring and peer mentoring. Peer tutoring and using peer mentors, you can recruit them to program devices. They can read stories and text passages to the student. They can also help create an e-story, and they can use that and get the student to listen to the story if the student is listening, and then they can ask some questions as a follow-up to the lesson that the teacher has presented, so that the student has multiple opportunities to work with that same lesson and then being able to identify. So the peer records the story, and then other activities that the peers can do is to use, like, for example, rhyming words, what rhymes with tree, what rhymes with boy, and things like that they can work on to further reinforce the concept. But it is important to train that peer so that the peer is not the one who's continuously dominating that peer-to-peer activity, but the student, the focus student, the student who has significant needs, should be equal partner or more of a partner in that lesson. So we do have to do careful training of that peer tutor or the peer mentor in order for the student with significant needs to be able to learn and benefit from that lesson. And then how do we link the IEP objectives? How do we make sure that the IEP objectives are addressed? So we have to make sure, as we are writing the objective, we have to write it in such a way, given an array of the pictures and the representational items associated with that story, and also some non-story related distractors, the student will point to the picture of a story character or a story theme or a story event, whatever your learning objective, your focus is on at that time. For 8 out of 10 consecutive stories and text passages. This is something you have to monitor on a regular basis, and I have a slide that I'll share. So let us say you're thinking of the giving tree. So given 3 choices, one of them the correct choice and the other 2 distractors, the student makes the selection. And also it is important the student connects what he is learning in these lessons to his own or her own personal life. What was this tree looking for? Kind of a friendship with the boy. What was the boy looking for? Some material things. So gradually you build that concept and understanding. And through the peer interaction that I mentioned in the previous slide, you are also increasing that appropriate social connection and interaction with peers and adults. And you can also use that, take any story, especially the story of the giving tree, to generate some ideas or information about herself or himself, in this case, about himself. And then they can use a graphic organizer and a word bank that's text with pictures to generate information about them. how old the student is, what grade the student is, first beginning with his or her name, and what are some things he likes to eat, what are some places he likes to visit. So you can also use that, a personal story for the student to build using a graphic organizer. So these are ways you are building on the cognitive skills, the language skills, and also connect it with the student so that it is personally relevant and meaningful for that student. And one of the things that we also need to do on a regular basis, transfer that information that the student has learned into a variety of contexts. Because the purpose of learning is we are able to generalize whatever we have learned in one context in several other contexts. So provide multiple opportunities. If the student is using an assistive technology device, as I mentioned before, a speech generating device, the student should be able to use it in the cafeteria. The student should be able to use it in the library. The student should be able to use it when he or she goes to recess. Same way, the student should be able to select a book given two choices. The student should be able to read various signs, assuming you select some signs and you have paired them with some picture to help the student. Make choices for lunch. When you go outside, maybe there is a way you can connect some of the nature surrounding the student with, let's say, if you're doing the giving tree, some of the features of the tree, and the student gains understanding of that, connecting that tree that in the story with the tree in the playground. And one of the things that I have observed, quite often students who use wheelchairs and they are not using the playground equipment, then they are just sitting in the wheelchair the entire time there is recess. And that's an opportunity for a peer to come and connect with the student. That is an opportunity for the student to learn a few things that's in the playground. That is an opportunity for the student to expand her vocabulary and to connect and greet with other students outside of the student's classroom. So these are all ways, and you can extend the activities by playing games, through drama, through playing charades, and applying the concept knowledge in a variety of, they look at a tree and that tree doesn't have any fruit, then say, what kind of fruits can the trees give? So those are all connecting the real life situations with what they have learned in the classroom will help not only extend the lesson, will be able to generalize, and then you can follow it up with some kind of a activity that the parent can do at home when they go to the grocery store to be able to identify some of the fruits beyond apple. And again, another activity for extending the lesson is to create a kind of a daily lunch log that is paired with pictures. I do have, I was just looking for something that I had put together that I can show you, which is exactly what you see on the slide, and different days of the week and different foods, and especially vegetables and fruits. If the student can identify and connect with the apple from the giving tree, that's a way. And this is also could become a writing framework for the student, and the student makes choices between the different things. So, and each picture is paired with that. And you can also link it with assistive technology device. And it is important to monitor the progress the student makes. What is the objective? What is the response the student is giving as you are monitoring and checking the progress? What kind of prompts are being used? Does the student need intensive physical prompting, or is it verbal prompting, or is it gesture? You have to note down. And at the same time, it is important also to gather any anecdotal record, anecdotal notes on what the student is demonstrating in various other settings besides in the classroom, where you can use a progress monitoring data sheet. If the student is in the playground, or is the student in the cafeteria, if the student is going into, let's say he's generally in a self-contained classroom, but goes out for an inclusion setting for a couple of classes. So you can even note it down on index cards, or you can post-it notes, little anecdotal notes, and then connect it with the progress monitoring. We have another poll. Okay. Which do you use prior to your language lessons? Prior to delivering your language lesson, what do you routinely use during the planning stage for your students who have significant and complex learning needs? Do you consider the specific needs of the student? Do you consider the specific objectives that you are going to address in the lesson? Do you make sure that you are following and applying the UDL principle? Do you make sure that you have assembled all the adapted materials, not just for one student, but a variety, maybe 3 or 4 students that you may have, who may have diverse, complex needs? Or do you do you also make sure that it is a hands-on lesson? Go ahead and identify what you do. Looks like many of you do consider the specific needs and the functioning level of individual students. That's absolutely fantastic, because no 2 students with significant, severe, and multiple disabilities are identical. So it is extremely important that you personalize that delivery, personalize how the student responds. That's great. And the specific objective, sometimes we use the same question with every student and the same, but it is important to modify so that the student is always not being prompted to respond, but has the opportunity to be successful with a correct response. That is how we build the confidence of the student. And it is important to gather all the materials ahead of time so that we use that, and then using as much as possible for students with severe and multiple disabilities, concrete representational items, and making connections between what they see outside as a tree and then the picture of the tree that they may see in the lesson. Okay, I'm going to share the results. It's kind of equally divided, except for the UDL principle. And UDL has a website, which is cast.org, and you can get far more information than what I have shared in that website. So I'm sharing with you here another student who is slightly, you may think of as someone who is slightly higher functioning. She uses actually some single words, and she has a vocabulary of 20 to 25 words, and she is able to answer some basic recall questions. So she still needs an adapted summary of the text and maybe PowerPoint presentation. But in her case, not only does she have a little bit of attention issue, but she tends to be impulsive. Because she tends to be impulsive, one of the things is her responses are very quick without reflecting, she responds. So we need to avert that and get her to be more careful and attentive. So we have to train on that. At the same time, another thing that she does is reach out and touch other students in other desks and grab the materials during instruction, especially if they're sitting on a circular table and she is sitting there, she tries to reach out and touch the other students or the materials that they have. So she has to learn how to maintain personal space. So there should be a kind of a visual guidance for her around the area that she's sitting. And one of the ways you can help her is to use social stories, or what are called scripted stories, or social narratives. These are visual stories to help her with socially appropriate behaviors. And one of the things, again, is to role play some of these situations so that all students benefit from that. And if you can highlight some of the words, and you can also project it on the screen, that will help her and teach her to respond to appropriate cues and prompts paired with maybe some picture to get her to kind of, for example, if she's reaching out and touching other things, just a picture quietly showing her would help, or gesturing towards a picture that's on her space would also help her to get back to keeping her hand within her personal space. Those are all some supports. Let's say we are doing the story of Charlotte's Web. These are all some of the different ways that you build the comprehension and vocabulary, and then combine it with a letter, with a very simple writing activity. Okay, given two choices. Charlotte was she pleasant? Was she grouchy? And maybe you can increase it to 4 choices. Was she mean? Was she kind? And then let her build that story using the story writing frame, and then using kind of a felt pictures and connecting it with the student. And then maybe you can also do another thing you can do is to record the story and adapted, simplified version of the story in a tool, in a device called the photo album. And student can turn the pages and you can have simple 1-sentence text paired with a picture, and the student activates it and listens to the story. This particular device is available from Attainment. And then moving on to another story, maybe the student is at a different level, maybe at the middle school level, you're using the story of Wizard of Oz and sequence of events. And then only one example I want to mention, we talk about, maybe we read the story and then we talk about Dorothy and her friends facing different obstacles. How do we explain the word obstacle? Can we actually set up some kind of an obstacle course in the classroom so that the student can experience obstacle, so that they comprehend that? That's how we should be thinking in terms of our lesson delivery. And then the other part is using a Venn diagram to compare 2 characters. And then using charades game, while students portray different characters, and then with supports like assistive technology and with a little bit of maybe a mask that they wear, not the mask of COVID, but a different face supports, or some kind of hat to represent, let's say, the witches, or something to designate that particular character's role, or just to depict that character. And then making comparisons is the next stage to identifying characters. So we can work on all of that. And then it is important to adjust when we are presenting questions at different complexity levels. I already mentioned about that. There is the one level of who were the characters in the story, to another higher complexity level. Was the boy nice to the tree? That requires some thinking. What made the tree happy? Again, a little bit more complex thinking. Tell me one thing that happened in the story. So let's say we go to the Dorothy. What are several things that happened as Dorothy and her friends were going on the journey? So it's important to adjust the question we pose also to the functioning level of the student so that we let them experience success. So as we close, I want to emphasize different things. We want to use formal and informal strategies. We want to use intentional teaching while we are delivering the lesson, and incidental teaching when we are in the cafeteria, in the library, in the gym, and when we are playing outside. So we have to really focus on how do we use every moment in the day that we are with the student as teachable moment. Use all these, exploit these opportunities to strengthen vocabulary, communication and language skills, and build concept knowledge beyond your language and reading instructional times. Make learning fun with using simple devices in the beginning before you go to complex devices, so that the student can activate the device herself or himself. Play games. Make sure your word wall has limited number of words and you're gradually changing and expanding. And the most important thing for us to remember is that we do not use intrusive prompting throughout. Maybe initially you may use physical prompting and gradually reduce that prompting intensity. And as I said, most of the ideas come from this book and the other book. And thank you very much for joining this webinar. I'll be happy to answer any of the questions that you have. Some of the webinars that are upcoming. This webinar focused on the language, reading, vocabulary building, combined with the concept knowledge. For this session, the next webinar will focus on how do we make mathematics learning meaningful and connect it also with the student's personal life through a variety of hands-on activities. And then in January, focus will be on students with autism, understanding them better, their characteristics, and then how do we provide student-specific and setting-specific personalized interventions. Now let me, I will answer the question. Let me thank AbleNet University for giving me this opportunity and for hosting the webinar. And I thank each and every one of you who joined this webinar and making it joyful and fun for me to share this information. One of the questions is Padmaja willing to share her storyboard template with us? Yes. Yes. I will be happy to send. If you send an email to me, I can send it. My email address is psarathy@earthlink.net. I'll be happy to share that. You could also copy it maybe from that, but I'll be happy to send you. Anyone who sends me an email, I'll be happy to send you the storyboard template. I have one at the lower complexity level and one at the higher complexity level. I'm trying to see if yeah. I will show you the picture for the person who asked me. This one is at the lower complexity level, and this one is a slightly higher complexity level. I'll be happy to send you both of them because one has more things for a student, so that you give each student one of these graphic organizers towards the end of the lesson so that they are identified. And then you can make sure different students who are functioning at different levels, their needs are addressed. I'm looking at any other questions. I don't see it. So with that, thank you very much. And again, a very special thank you to AbleNet and to all of you who joined the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Padmaja, for all of the great information. That will end our webinar for today. We'll see you next month.